Avatar The Last Airbender, known as one of the greatest cartoons of all time and greatest shows of all time, loved by both critics and audiences, known for its amazing characters and storytelling, and amazing fight scenes. Hello there, I'm Bonnibert, and today I'm definitely doing something you haven't ever seen before on YouTube. Like, absolutely never. I'm going to be ranking all the episodes in this awesome show. This will not be a short video. So sit back, relax, maybe grab a couple snacks or two. I don't want to waste your time at all. Let's get right into it. Starting with the worst episode. Oh yeah, before I get started, I just want to say I'm not an expert on characters or storytelling, so if I get anything wrong, just tell me. At number 61, we have The Great Divide. Yeah, if you watched this show, you knew this was going to be here. This episode absolutely sucks. So it's basically about these two tribes who don't like each other because of the past or whatever, and because of how different they are. Just something you'd find in pretty much any movie, really. How did they make an episode this bad in a show like this? That just makes it even worse. Like, this show has mostly good episodes, so it makes their little slip-ups even worse. I also love how they make fun of this episode later in the show, because even the creators knew it was bad. So you may be asking, what makes this episode so bad? Well, the two groups realize that they're not that different, but they're still mad at each other because of what happened in the past. So what does Aang do? He lies to get them to shut up, because lying will solve all your problems, kids. He makes up this really stupid story, and it's just so stupid, and I just hate talking about this episode. This is just an example of bad filler that actually didn't need to happen. Like, there were so many other ways to solve this stupid problem. But no, they just decide to lie because lying fixes everything. Yeah, I said it before. But I don't think parents want their kids to learn how to lie to make things go better. Like, in my notes, I gave this episode a 2 out of 10. Which, yes, is the lowest score in the show. But I don't even think it deserves that high of a score. I don't think it really deserves any points. Okay, maybe 1. But it has no redeeming qualities. It's that bad. I feel like we should move on to the next episode before I get really mad, but just know that this is the absolute lowest it can go. Things only get better from here. At number 60, we have Avatar Day. And yeah, this episode really isn't good. Don't get me wrong, it's a lot better than The Great Divide, but not by too much. In my notes, The Great Divide got a 2 out of 10, and this got a 3.5 out of 10. So yeah, not a huge step up. I mean, I'll tell you what I did kind of like. This episode has some jokes that are okay. I chuckled at some at the very least. I guess it was cool that we learned more about Avatar Kyoshi and how she formed Kyoshi Island. And I really like what Iroh said to Zuko about having hope in the darkest of times. Because Uncle Iroh always has good wisdom. Yeah, this episode is just a big waste of time in my opinion. The only important thing we get out of it is Zuko leaving Iroh, which they reunite in a few episodes, so it doesn't really matter. It's just a really boring episode that I usually skip whenever I rewatch this show. I don't absolutely hate it or anything, it's just pretty bad. At number 59, we have The Painted Lady. I'll try to make this one pretty quick. First of all, I have no idea why there's this much filler so early in Season 3. Like, I know we're just wasting time before the invasion, but you know what? I would have rather seen, the characters learning about life in the Fire Nation, because this episode really could have been in Season 2 in the Earth Kingdom. I probably would have preferred that over this. And the whole liar reveal cliche is actually kind of dumb. Like, everyone finds out that Katara is acting as the Painted Lady, and it's just really stupid. I mean, the only good redeeming quality was this Doc guy. I actually laughed a couple times at him. He practically carried the episode on his back. Man, this man's got a lot going on. He's got so many jobs, and he's also carrying this episode on his back. What a hard-working man. I hope it gets paid well. I mean, I guess it's a decent lesson about how pollution can affect the ecosystem and animals and stuff like that. It's something we can relate to the real world because we have, factories polluting lakes and stuff, and I guess it's a pretty cool message. Yeah, this episode just is boring. not really important, and you can expect a lot of filler to be down in the bottom spots. I know I sound unhappy at the moment, but that's because it's like 3 in the morning when I'm recording this, and I have to talk about bad episodes like these. I promise it'll be a lot better once we get to the good episodes. This may make some people mad, but at number 58, we have Imprisoned. But I got reasons. First of all, I ranked this episode a little higher than the previous ones on this list. Like, by number. I gave it a 4.7 out of 10, which isn't absolutely terrible. I just really don't find this episode to be interesting at all. Haru doesn't really have any personality traits. I'm pretty sure his dad is more interesting than him. And Haru's like the main focus of the episode. I mean, I guess I like Katara's speech to the Earthbenders and stuff. That was pretty cool. And I like the little conversation she has with Haru about the effects of war. They do touch on that topic a lot, but this episode did it pretty well. And how in the world could I forget the Momo earthbending scene? This is single-handedly the funniest joke in all of Avatar. Sure, there are a lot funnier episodes, but this takes the cake for the funniest part of any episode in the whole show. It's funny how stupid the guards are. Like, of course it's not the lemur, you idiot. But the fact that they thought it was Momo was just so stupid. And the lead up to the joke was just pretty goofy as well. How Katara delivered the line, earthbending style. That was pretty goofy. And the whole fake fight that she had with Sokka was hilarious. I'm sorry, I can't talk. I didn't expect to talk about this joke that much, but yet, here we are. Yeah, I'm sure I'm boring you with my Momo earthbending talk, so let's move on. At the number 57 spot, we have the waterbending scroll. Now, I do know some people that like this episode, but it's just not for me. First of all, I think it's just really stupid how Katara gets mad at Aang for being good at waterbending. Of course it's going to come kind of easy to him because he's the Avatar. That's why he got his airbending master arrows at a young age. It just really makes Katara look selfish when that's really not who she is. If anything, I think she's the most selfless character in the show. These pirate dudes are honestly kind of uninteresting and dumb. Except for this pirate right here, he was pretty funny. I mean, he had some really good line delivery. I do think it's pretty cool that we got to see some waterbending, because so far, we've only seen a little bit of it. So it's cool that we got to see more of it. Now, in my notes, I said that this was the definition of mid. And I still believe that. It's just a 5 out of 10. Nothing special. At the number 56 spot, we have Bato of the Water Tribe. Now, I don't hate this episode like a lot of other people do. But that doesn't mean that it's good. Yeah, there's a whole liar reveal plotline, which is pretty dumb. And Aang acts pretty selfish. Which, like I said about Katara, it's the opposite of his character. He helps people. And the whole misunderstanding is just pretty dumb. Aang leaves right before Katara and Sokka say that they can't leave him behind. And I think that Katara and Sokka went back to Aang way too quickly. This whole plot just kind of annoys me. But what carries this episode is the final fight. It had no business going this hard, but it did. Appa got some action, Aang vs. Zuko was awesome. I just have no idea why this battle was so amazing. This June lady was pretty interesting, I guess. I really liked her Shearshu, I think it was called. One of the more interesting creatures in the show. And Uncle Iroh was hilarious, especially this scene right here. Like I said before, I don't hate this episode. I just don't really like the whole storyline with Aang lying and the whole misunderstanding. It's just another filler, like a lot of the other episodes in Season 1 are. At number 55, we have The Headband. I really don't have a lot of thoughts about this episode. I mean, it's just another filler episode early in Season 3, and it's not the worst thing in the world. I like the parts with Zuko. I like the dancing scene in the cave. That was pretty cool, I guess. This episode was actually kind of funny, and I guess it was cool to see a little more of what life is like in the Fire Nation. But in my opinion, this episode is pretty forgettable, and it's just another time-wasting filler before the invasion. It's really not anything special. Like I said, I don't have too many thoughts on this, so let's just move on to the next one. At the number 54 spot, we have the Northern Air Temple. This episode has some good things and a lot of bad things, and they kind of balance each other out. First of all, I really like how we get to see Sokka's smart side in this episode. It really adds a lot to his character, and it actually becomes a pretty important part of the series with the whole invasion plan. And it just adds more to him than just comic relief and goofy sarcasm guy. I really don't find this Teo kid to be interesting at all. He's kind of like Haru, where his dad is more interesting than him. I guess it's cool seeing people adopt air nomad culture, I guess. Well, it's not really culture, it's just the way that they fly around. I think it's cool that we get to see another air temple, because we've only really seen the southern one, and heard about the eastern one. But this episode just doesn't stand out to me. Like I said before, a lot of the episodes in Book 1 are a lot of filler, and this episode is no different. I think I give it like a 5.9 out of 10 in my notes. So now we're getting into the more decent episodes. The 6 to 8 out of 10s. Starting with, at the number 53 spot, we have The Desert. If I'm being completely honest with y'all, this episode is kinda boring. For a lot of it, at least. It's really just the gang traveling through the desert for most of it. It does sort of introduce us to the White Lotus, which is pretty cool. And we really realize how much Appa means to Aang and the gang in general. We see Aang more angry than he's ever been before because he lost his best friend. It's pretty sad seeing him like this because we know it's not really like who he is. My man's even went into the Avatar state because he was so upset that he lost his best friend. This scene's pretty cool. We see Katara comforting Aang, telling him it's going to be alright, and Aang realizes that this angry monster isn't really who he is. And it does set up a big plot point for the rest of the season that they have to find Appa. Like I said, I'm not an expert on characters or storytelling, so I don't know if I got any of that right, but that's how I interpret the scene. Oh yeah, did I mention that this episode is freaking hilarious? Some of the funniest stuff in almost any Avatar episode is in this episode, besides Momo Earthbending. I mean, Sokka on cactus juice is just the funniest thing ever. And I quote this episode all the time. Overall, the ending carries and Sokka on cactus juice carries. It's just decent, in my opinion. At number 52, we have Nightmares and Daydreams. This is an absolute fever dream of an episode, which is appropriate considering the title. But this episode has a ton of crazy stuff going on. And sure, it's just another filler before the invasion, but it's a hilarious one. Now, I feel like this is the episode where Zuko fully turns good, because he says he didn't really feel like himself in the war room, and he realizes what the Fire Nation is about to do is pretty crazy, although he doesn't say that until like one of the last episodes. This episode just sets up his redemption in the next episode pretty well. But let's get back to the crazy daydreams and stuff. Now, I like this episode a lot more than a lot of people do. That's probably because I think it's one of the funniest episodes in the show. I actually laughed out loud at multiple points in this episode. The best part was obviously Momo versus Appa. First of all, it puts the cursed image in my head of Appa standing up on 2 feet. And it's just a crazy, fun battle. This episode actually isn't terrible. But like I said, I just like it because it's really goofy. At number 51, we got The Fortune Teller. First of all, I just want to say that this is one of the funniest episodes in Book 1. Sokka was definitely the funniest part, but there were a lot of other funny parts too. Sure, it doesn't add much to the series, but it's a pretty lighthearted episode that sets up the best relationship in the show, which is Aang and Katara. Well, I don't know about the best, but one of the best. But it does a pretty good job of setting it up, and it's the first time we kind of like explored it a little more. Oh yeah, and how could I forget the volcano scene? It's honestly a pretty epic moment in Season 1. Probably one of the most epic moments in Season 1. And we see Aang do what Roku couldn't. He stopped a volcano. This just proves how awesome Aang is. And this is just an awesome scene. I really do wish there was more to talk about in this episode, but there really isn't. It's a little forgettable, and it's just decent. At number 50, we have The Swamp. Yeah, you can boo me all you want. I just want you guys to know that I feel positive about, 85% of the episodes in this show. So I don't really think this episode is bad, and I know there's a lot of you guys out there who like this episode. It's only at this spot because there are a lot more better episodes than this one. And this one's a 6.8 out of 10. So we're getting into the more decent episodes. Okay, let's actually talk about the episode now. This episode is decent. Yeah, it's a little forgettable, and it's not a real big standout like a lot of other episodes in this season. But I really do like the world building in this episode. Like with the swamp benders and that you can bend the water inside of plants. I think that's actually pretty cool. These swamp benders are actually pretty funny. They made me chuckle a couple times. Especially when they mention Old Slim. That was pretty funny. And this episode does set up Toph. I mean, they have done that a couple times already, but this is the most they've teased her. My biggest problem is that this episode does have a couple unanswered questions, like where'd that tornado come from, and yeah. I do think this episode does get a little slow in the middle. Then the action gets going and it gets better from there. So overall, it's a pretty decent episode, a little forgettable. Let's just move on to the next one. Sticking with the mid to high 6 out of 10s, let's go on to number 49, The King of Omashu. Yeah, this is one of the weaker episodes in book 1, but it's still pretty decent. I really like King Boomy and his goofy personality, and I'm glad that they brought him back in later seasons. One thing I don't really like about this episode is that Katara and Sokka don't have a lot to do. They're kind of just there the whole episode. And this may just be me, but I think the animation is a little worse than some earlier episodes in the season. And that kind of takes it away from me. Now, the first 2 challenges that Boomy gives Aang are a little lame. They're just kind of there to waste time so we can get to the 3rd challenge. But the 3rd challenge is fighting Boomy, and it's really fun. It's like one of the first big bending battles we've seen, and it's pretty decent for the first one. And this episode does get some bonus points for introducing Cabbage Man. He has one of the funniest gags in the show. Yeah, this episode is just decent. Nothing amazing, nothing terrible. I think it's on the same level as The Swamp. We're still in the high 6 out of 10s with Winter Solstice Part 1, The Spirit World. I don't have too many thoughts on this episode because it's really overshadowed by the second part. But it does a pretty decent job of setting the second part up. And you'll have to see where I rank that one later. I really do like the world building we get here with the whole spirit world stuff. And I must say that this show excels at the world building. The action in this episode is pretty decent. And Uncle Iroh was pretty funny. But I must say, the animation in this episode is a lot worse than Part 2's animation. And I don't really know why. I really do think Uncle Iroh does carry this episode. Like I said, it's decent. It's just really overshadowed by the second part, and it just does a decent job of setting up the whole spirit world and the second part. We're finally starting to get into the 7 out of 10s. Number 47, The Awakening. Yeah, this is definitely the weakest season opening episode out of the whole series. That doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Compared to the other 2 season opening episodes, it's not amazing. First of all, we're on a Fire Nation ship for most of it. There's not much action besides the whole serpent thing. And I don't really like how Katara is mad at Hakoda. This may just be me, but I feel like this just came out of nowhere and didn't really need to happen. And in this episode, we see how the Crossroads of Destiny affected both Aang and Zuko. Zuko has an inner conflict with himself, and Aang wants his honor back because he feels like he failed the world once again. This episode does a pretty good job of showing us the effects of Crossroads of Destiny on basically the whole show. So while yes, it's a little weak for a season starting episode, it does have some good to it. And that's why it's a 7 out of 10. At number 46, we have Appa's Lost Days. My gosh, this episode is really hard to get through. If I'm being completely honest, it could probably go a little higher, but I just don't like the way it makes me feel. I never knew I could care so much for a side animal character, but yet here we are. I hate seeing how much torture and pain Appa had to go through while he was away from Aang, and this episode makes us realize even more how much they rely on each other. Now, this episode does tease some stuff coming up later in the season. Most importantly, Guru Pratik, because, he's the one to help Aang master the Avatar state. But man, this episode just makes me cry every time. And it's not even a happy ending. Appa gets locked in jail by Long Fang. While it could be higher, I just don't like how it makes me feel. Next up, we got a hot take. Number 45, The Boiling Rock Part 1. Now, I know multiple people who love this episode, but in my opinion, and just like the spirit world, it's overshadowed by Part 2. I'll get the good things out of the way first. I really like Sokka and Zuko's dynamic. It's kind of like they're brothers and they're always there for each other. Well, maybe not brothers, more like best friends. I like how they're always there to help each other out. And they're my two favorite characters in the show, so of course I'm going to like it. I guess it's cool how Suki returns again. Not much to say about it. She's just cool, I guess. And I think it's cool that we get to see even more of Sokka's smart side and him and Zuko working together. Now, I really do think this episode didn't have to be 2 parts. You'll see later that part 2 is better, but I feel like they could have given a 2-parter to Aang learning firebending, or heck, even Katara's field trip with Zuko. I do feel like this is one of the more pointless 2-parters. It does do a decent job of setting up the next part. So overall, while not an amazing episode, it's still got a lot of fun character moments, and the stakes are high. I just don't think it had to be 2 parts. Next up, we have the episode that started it all, The Boy in the Iceberg. Now, first of all, this episode gets extra points for existing, because if it didn't, we wouldn't have this amazing show. And while, yes, the animation is pretty outdated, and it being a little boring, it still has a lot going for it. First of all, I love how we see these characters' personalities right off the bat. Like we see how Sokka is sarcastic and funny, and how Katara stands up for what's right, and how Aang is a fun-loving kid who's really brave and willing to do anything. It wastes no time introducing us to bending, and sets the whole show up really with that whole explanation of the war from Katara. It lets us know what the state of the world is and what we're getting ourselves into. Yeah, I don't really like Zuko in the first half of book 1. He kind of just seems like your average villain. So, I hate to admit this, but he's one of the weaker parts of episode 1. So, while not being a perfect first episode, it's still enjoyable. It makes us ask some questions and makes us excited for what's going to happen next. It's a pretty decent hook. At number 43, we have The Warriors of Kyoshi. This episode is pretty decent. I don't have too much to say, so I'll try to do it quickly. I like the early development we get with Sokka, of him learning to respect women. That's pretty cool. The Kyoshi Warriors are pretty interesting and cool. I like Suki, and I'm glad that they brought her back later. This episode does a pretty good job of setting up her character. This episode is one of the more funny ones in Season 1. I did laugh a couple times, but especially at Foaming Mouth Guy. If I had one complaint, it would be that it kind of gets a little slow and boring in the middle, with all the girls chasing Aang, and it's kind of annoying. That's my only problem with the episode. Overall, it's pretty nice. It's a cool way to introduce us to one of Aang's past lives, and it's one of the better book 1 fillers. Now we're on the very high end of decent, with number 42, The Runaway. Now this is a pretty good Toph episode. She hasn't gotten too many episodes focused on her, so it was nice seeing that. And she is one of the best characters in the show. Sadly, this episode isn't that memorable, and it's another one of the many fillers before the invasion. So I'm gonna have to dock some points off for that. But this episode's pretty funny. All the blind jokes are funny, and I have one question. What happened to hockey? This episode does have some pretty good emotional moments, especially between Sokka and Toph and Katara and Toph, and that allows for some Toph development, which is nice. So while it's not the most memorable episode, it's still pretty good. Well, pretty decent. It's got some great moments. At the number 41 spot, we have The Return to Omashu. I just want to start by saying that this is the last episode to get a 6 to 8 out of 10 ranking. Well, really, it's a 7.9 out of 10. But you get the point. From now on, all the episodes I rank will be an 8 out of 10 and above. But yeah, this episode introduces fan-favorite characters like Mei and Ty Lee, and it wastes no time setting them up. We get to see their personalities right away, which is something this show does a pretty good job at. And we see this trio get set up as a threat to Team Avatar. We've seen how powerful Azula can be, Mei's pretty powerful, and Ty Lee can chi block. They're more threatening than Zuko ever was, which really makes this season more exciting. My problem with the episode is that we've seen this story many times before. A resistance of people come together to take down something or someone that took over their city. I mean, stories like that aren't terrible, but it's stuff we've already seen before. The final battle of this episode was pretty cool. Like I said, it sets up the trio. I'm sure the trio has a name, I just don't know what it is. But it sets them up as a pretty good threat to Team Avatar, and it's just a fun fight in general. This episode teases Toph with what Boomy says about neutral Jing, because that's exactly what Toph does. She waits and listens and then strikes. This probably makes me sound like an idiot, but this is something I just picked up on this rewatch. So, yeah, this is a good episode. Now we're getting into the 8 out of 10s. Episodes that are 8 to 9 out of 10 means that they're good episodes. Not necessarily great, but good. 9 to 10 out of 10 means great, amazing, and 10 out of 10 means practically perfect. Just wanted to clarify that real quick. At number 40, we have The Serpent's Pass. Now, I had a pretty hard time putting this here, but I thought about it, and this is where it belongs. First of all, this episode has some pretty decent emotional moments, like the one with Sokka and Suki, just showing that Sokka isn't ready to let go of Yue yet. The action's pretty fun, fighting the serpent was pretty cool, and I like the return of Suki and Jet. I like his dynamic with Zuko, and I think it's cool that he changed. I do hate to say this, but this episode is just a little uninteresting because it's just the gang getting this couple through the Serpent's Pass, but it's not too uninteresting to the point where I don't want to watch it at all. The scene where the baby is born is nice, and Aang finding hope again is cool. I like Sokka's growth, and this is just a good episode. At number 39, we have The City of Walls and Secrets. I'll get the bad stuff out of the way first. This episode is a little slow because there's not much going on, which does take a point or two off. This episode is still good. First of all, it's awesome seeing the big city of Ba Sing Se for the first time because we've only really seen the wall, and it's one of the coolest locations in the show in my opinion. And this episode has a really cool, mystery, spooky vibe right from the beginning. This episode does a good job of setting up the rest of Season 2 by setting up one of the villains being Long Feng, and we find out that even though we're in the Earth Kingdom capital, the main characters still aren't that safe. And we see what they're going to have to get through to get to the Earth King. There are some stakes involved, which is good. I really like the sword fight between Zuko and Jet. I think it's really cool. It's nice having a fast-paced sword fight because this episode's been pretty slow so far. This episode's also pretty funny. I mean, it has some funny moments. And that's all I really have to say about this episode. It's not the most standout episode of Season 2, but it's pretty good. It does a good job of setting up the rest of the season, and it lets us know that Long Feng is a pretty big threat. Next up, we have number 38, The Blue Spirit. Now, this is a good follow-up to a good episode, and you'll have to see where I rank the storm later. And I've always liked this episode. It's just a really fun, Aang-focused episode. I feel like this is where we really start to see how selfless and brave he is. He's willing to do anything to save Katara and Sokka. Well, not really save, but help them feel better. We see him stand up to Admiral Zhao, and he's not even scared for a second. I really like the escape scene in this episode. It's really fun and fast-paced, and it's actually one of my favorite action set pieces in Season 1. Now, this might just be me, but I feel like this episode kind of teases or hints Zuko's redemption. The way he thinks about what Aang said about them possibly being friends kind of makes me think that they were kind of teasing his redemption this early in the show. This episode is also pretty funny, especially what Sokka says when he's sick, like when he says stuff about Appa's sense of humor. That stuff makes me laugh every time. Overall, an episode I've always liked, but this is an unpopular opinion, but there are a lot of episodes that are better than it. At number 37, we have The Cave of Two Lovers. Many people love this episode, and many people don't. I lean more on the love side, but it's more of like, I like it. It gets a lot of points for Secret Tunnel, and it's honestly really funny. This may sound stupid, but I do think there are too many jokes. But yeah, both storylines in this episode have funny moments. We get some nice moments between Aang and Katara in the cave, so that's pretty nice, I guess. And the Iroh and Zuko storyline, while not amazing, is still pretty good. And some people say that this is the start of Zuko's arc, and I can see why. I've always liked this episode, even though it's a filler episode. It's just a pretty good episode in Season 2. I've been talking for almost 30 minutes now, so if you stuck around this far, make sure you like and subscribe. That would be greatly appreciated. Okay, let's get right back into the ranking. At number 36, we have The Deserter. Now, if I'm being completely honest, I haven't always loved this episode. I don't know why. I think I found it to be boring and not interesting. and I still kind of think that, but this episode is still pretty good. I think Zhang's pretty interesting. This may sound like a bit of a stretch, but I think he kind of mirrors Zuko later on, because he's seen the bad that the Fire Nation has done and seen how dangerous fire is, sort of like Zuko in Book 3, so I think that's pretty cool. But like I said, that might be a little bit of a stretch. It's cool seeing Aang doing some firebending, and I do think he gets a little bit of development when he hurts Katara, because he realizes that you have to be patient and actually learn how to do stuff. And I think that can be seen getting carried over in later seasons. We also get a little bit of world building with Katara's healing abilities, which was nice. So overall, a good episode, but like I said before, I do think it's a little boring at some points. But still pretty good for Book 1. At number 35, we have The Earth King. Not gonna lie, this episode is just a little boring because it's just the gang trying to convince the Earth King that the war is actually happening. But there's still some good stuff. First of all, I really like the Earth King. He's pretty goofy, but it is kind of sad how dumb he is, because the entire time Long Feng has been controlling the city, and he's just been a figurehead. I really like the fight scene with the gang trying to get to the Earth King. It's actually pretty fun, and one of the best parts of the episode. Now this is the episode where Zuko really changes, and I like how they do it. It's very authentic because he did something good, and that really changed him. I like how he didn't just change right away. He struggled to do it. That's what makes his art great. It's authentic and believable. And I love the ending of this episode. Right when everything is going good for our main characters, we see that Azula's in Ba Sing Se, and that some crazy stuff's gonna go down. It really makes you wonder what's gonna happen in the last 2 episodes of the season, and it's really cool. It's just a great cliffhanger. So while it's not an amazing episode, it's still good. At number 34, we have The Guru. Now, I like this episode, even though it is more setup for the finale. I like Guru Pratik's personality, it's pretty fun, and he's one of the best parts of the episode. This episode sets up the stakes of the Crossroads of Destiny pretty well. It sets up the fact that Aang didn't master his avatar state, so things won't be as easy for him when he needs it. And it also sets up the fact that all of Ba Sing Se and the Earth Kingdom is at stake here. And it does that pretty well. I like Zuko in this episode because his arc has been building to this all season, so it's nice to see it get paid off. I love the scene where Toph creates metal bending. It's really cool, and it's one of the standout parts of this episode. So overall, it's a good episode. It sets up the finale, and there's a lot of lessons in there that we learn alongside Aang, like forgiving yourself and stuff like that. That's all I have to say. Let's go on to the next one. At number 33, we have The Beach. Now, me personally, I know a lot of people that love this episode, but I don't love it. I can definitely see where they're coming from, though. This episode does a great job of making these villains feel like actual relatable people, especially Mei and Ty Lee, because we hadn't really gotten to know them that much, so it's cool that they were humanized in this episode. While the rest of the episode is good, I don't really like the ending that much. They really had no point in destroying this dude's house. I love the scene where Zuko says that he's angry at himself. He's mad at himself for the decisions that he made in the past, and that's a big part of his character in Book 3. He has this conflict within himself because he doesn't know if he chose right or wrong, and he doesn't think he knows the difference between right and wrong. So while I don't love this episode like a lot of other people do, it's still good. At number 32, we have Bitter Work. This is an episode I always liked, and I liked it a little more on rewatch. First of all, it's really cool seeing Aang do earthbending, because we've been waiting for this for like half a season, and it's really cool. This episode is also pretty funny. Sokka gets a lot of good lines. Iroh has some funny moments. It's just pretty funny. We also get some cool world building by learning how to control lightning, which is pretty cool. And this show excels at world building. And I love the scene at the end with Zuko. The voice acting's great, the lines are great. It's just a great scene. And this is really Zuko at his lowest. And he slowly becomes better throughout the season. At number 31, we have the Western Air Temple. I'll get my problems with the episode out of the way first. I don't like how Aang runs away from his problems, because in the last episode he says that he'll fix this mess. But in this episode, he's just running away from them, which I don't really like. Now let's talk about what I did like. I liked how Zuko joined Team Avatar. Of course Team Avatar didn't want him to join at first, but he had to gain their trust. That's one of the good parts of the episode, how Zuko joins Team Avatar. I also like the scenes where Zuko's talking to himself. Those were pretty silly and funny. And that's where the classic, "Hello, Zuko here," came from. This is overall a pretty good episode. I like the action with Combustion Man, and I like the setting of the Western Air Temple. Oh, we're finally halfway done, so let's get into number 30, the Firebending Masters. I know this isn't a lot of people's top 10s, but not mine. Don't get me wrong, it's still really good. The judgment scene with the dragon is absolutely amazing. The setting, the colors, is just awesome. And I love how we also find out what fire really is as well. It's life, not just destruction, and I think that's a really cool part of this episode. I also love this scene where Aang and Zuko do the dancing dragon, like they're in sync with the dragons. We just get some really cool shots here. I also like the world building and lore we get with these Sun Warriors being the first firebenders, besides dragons. And we see how the Fire Nation has turned firebending into something destructive, and that's not really what it is. I also really like Aang and Zuko's dynamic. That's what's great about these field trip episodes. We get to see Zuko become a part of the team and have a relationship with these guys. It's really cool. I do think this episode could go a little higher, but it's still pretty good. We're finally in the top 30 with number 29, The Avatar Returns. Now, this episode's a lot better than I remembered. It has some great action, and the animation is noticeably better than a lot of other episodes in Book 1, even though it's the second episode. Every character gets the chance to stand out in this episode, especially Aang and Zuko. We see how brave Aang is, and we see how Zuko never really stops fighting. This is where the journey really starts. It's a good episode, and that's all I have to say. At number 28, we have The Winter Solstice Part 2, Avatar Roku. Now, one reason this episode is really high is because the animation is pretty good. And the action when they're going through the Fire Nation blockade is really cool, and when Aang destroys that big fireball, that was pretty awesome. I think it's one of the coolest scenes in Book 1. This episode also does a really good job of setting up the rest of the stakes and goals for the show. Like how Sozin's Comet is coming and Aang has to master all 4 elements before it comes. This episode does a pretty good job of explaining that. This episode has some pretty good world building, and I like that we get to meet Avatar Roku. So overall, this is a pretty good episode. Oh yeah, just in case you were wondering, we're still in the high 8 out of 10s. At number 27, we have Sokka's Master. I've always liked this episode. It's a really good one. This episode made me realize how much I love Sokka's character, and he gets some pretty good development in this episode. It's just a great episode focused on him. I really like Pian Dao, and I'm glad that they brought him back. He's just a pretty cool character. And I like how they teased him being in the White Lotus at the end of the episode. That was pretty cool. And the sword fight at the end was actually awesome. It's cool seeing how much Sokka's grown throughout the episode as a fighter. Anyways, I've always liked this episode, and I always like rewatching it. At number 26, we have Sozin's Comet Part 1, The Phoenix King. Yeah, this is the weakest part of the 4-part finale, but it's still good. I'll get my biggest problem out of the way first. I really don't like how the lion turtle just shows up out of nowhere with no explanation. Was he just like, "Oh, hey, the Avatar needs me. I guess I gotta come here." I always haven't liked that part of this episode. It definitely could have been written a little better. But yeah, this episode's pretty good. It does a great job of setting up the stakes for the rest of the 4-part finale. Before this, we hadn't seen too much of Firelord Ozai, so this episode does a great job of setting up how evil he really is. This episode also has a lot of funny moments. It's the funniest episode in the 4-part finale. Like I said before, this episode does a great job of setting up the stakes, like how Aang has to find a way to beat Firelord Ozai without killing him, and just the whole world in general is at stake because Firelord Ozai plans on destroying the Earth Kingdom. Even though this episode is mostly set up, it's still pretty good. At number 25, we have The Chase. Fun fact, this episode used to be my favorite. It's obviously not anymore, but still. This is a really fun episode that I've obviously always liked. It's cool seeing Toph with the gang, and we see how funny that she can be. This episode is really funny. This episode has some great action, especially at the ending. When everyone comes together to fight Azula, that was awesome. This episode also introduces Toph's arc, as her arc is all about learning how to get help from others and being part of a team. I'll talk more about that when we get to a certain episode. So yeah. This episode also does a great job of making Azula seem like an absolute menace. I mean, you know she's bad when Zuko, Iroh, and everyone teams up to fight her. This really sets her up as the main villain of the show, which she kinda is. Alongside Ozai, of course. Anyways, I've always liked this episode, and I said what I had to say. At number 24, we have The Drill. Now, this episode is just straight action, and I'm here for it. It's fast-paced, awesome, and if I'm being 100% honest here, Aang vs. Azula on The Drill may be one of my favorite fights in the whole show. It's just really cool. My biggest problem with this episode is that Toph gets sidelined. I know that may sound stupid, but I think Toph is really cool, and I think she could have helped out a lot. Not much character development or anything here, because that was mostly for the last episode. Just a really action-packed, funny episode that I've liked a lot. Let's just move on to the next one. At number 23, we have Jet. Now, this is a pretty good Book 1 episode. Unlike a lot of Book 1 episodes, this one's pretty memorable. And I know this sounds like I'm hating on Book 1, but that's just how I feel about it. First of all, I like Jet's character. While his actions aren't justified, it's understandable where he's coming from. And he's just a cool villain for this episode. And I'm glad they brought him back later. Sokka has some time to shine in this episode, which is nice because he's been sidelined for basically all of Book 1 so far. So it's really cool to see him get some great moments. I really like the battle at the trees in the end. It's a great setting, and it has some great choreography. This is a pretty underrated episode, and while there are 22 other episodes that are better than it, I still like it. At number 22, we have The Blind Bandit. After this episode, pretty sure we start getting into the 9 out of 10s and above. This is the perfect introduction to a new character. It's the episode we've been waiting since the start of Book 2, and it's finally here. And it subverts your expectations. You'd expect it to be some big, buff guy, when in reality, it's a blind little girl. The exact opposite of what we've seen in Earthbender to be so far. That's what's absolutely awesome about Toph. Her character is already given so much depth in the first episode that she appears in, which is awesome. You really get some time to know her. We see how tragic her character kind of is because she's been hiding her true identity all her life, and how she always had to act like someone she wasn't. It really gives us time to connect with her, and I gotta say, the action in this episode is awesome. We see seismic sense for the first time, which is awesome. It's really cool in a different way of earthbending. And I always thought the battle at the ending with all the wrestlers was just really cool, seeing this little girl beat up these big buff guys. And obviously, I love the boulder. Who doesn't? Like I said, this is pretty much the perfect introduction episode, and I've always loved it. At number 21, we have The Storm. This is a great episode. I'm a sucker for backstory episodes, and this one just delivers all the way. It adds so much more depth to Zuko and Aang's character. I'll talk about Aang first. For a while, we've seen Aang as this goofy, heroic kid. In this episode, we learn of his ghost, or the thing he's most ashamed of or blames himself for. Fun fact, I took a class last year. It was something about storytelling. Learned about good characters, and we actually watched this episode to learn about that. And that's where I learned about this ghost of the past. Anyways, he blamed himself for this war because he ran away. And we learn how tragic his story is because the Masters wanted to take everything he had so he could become the Avatar. And this episode just adds so much to Aang's character, and it's awesome. And now we get to Zuko. I don't have much to say here because pretty much everyone knows it, but we learn how tragic his character is and how he got his scar. We saw how he used to be good, and all of that good was basically drained out of him for a while. For a while, we've seen Zuko as this one-dimensional villain chasing the hero, and he was kind of cartoony. But we finally know why he's been chasing Aang. We finally learn why he is the way he is. This episode makes him more of a sympathetic character. We see that he was a good guy at one point, and because of that, he's not. This episode just adds so much to his character. This is a lot of people's favorite Book 1 episode, and I can absolutely see why. Me personally, I have 3 or 4 more book 1 episodes that I like more, but this one is absolutely amazing, and it deserves to be at the number 21 spot. I do think it could probably go a little higher, so I guess you could say it could be switched out with the next couple spots. I don't know. At number 20, we have The Puppet Master. This is a great episode. First of all, I love the horror/mystery vibe that this episode has. It's a lot different than a lot of other episodes in the show. The build-up to Hama being the one who's been taking all these people was awesome. Like, she talks to Katara about water being in every living thing, and then the old guy says that he felt like it was possessed. That was pretty cool. And you can kind of put the mystery together yourself, which I felt was awesome. I really like the world building we get in this episode with the whole history of the Southern Water Tribe and the raids. We finally get to learn how Katara became the only waterbender there. And we finally learned about more waterbending techniques that I would never think about. And the final action sequence in this episode was awesome. It's cool seeing 2 strong waterbenders duel it out again. And it's cool that we see the techniques that Katara learned throughout the episode in this battle. I think it's one of Katara's best battles in my honest opinion. This is a great episode, and I usually see a lot of people put it near the top of their list. I'm sorry, I can't talk. Anyways, let's just move on to the top 20. At number 19, we have the Avatar State. Yeah, I believe this is the strongest season opening episode. First of all, I just want to say the action at the end was awesome. We really see how the action scenes have stepped up since book 1 in this episode. And we see how much better the animation quality has gotten in this episode. And this episode is a really great introduction to Azula. With her first lines, we see exactly who she is. We see how powerful she can be and how manipulative she is. And it really does a great job of setting her up as this big villain. I still do think Toph's introduction is better, but this is still pretty close to perfect. This episode does a great job of setting up key concepts and goals that come up later in the season. Like Aang finding an earthbending teacher, or him mastering the Avatar State, and how being killed in the Avatar State resets the Avatar cycle. I said that wrong. It doesn't reset it, it just breaks it. Overall, this is just a really good season-starting episode that I've always liked ever since the first time I watched it. At number 18, we have The Library! I had way too much fun editing that. But yeah, I think this is a pretty underrated episode. And by underrated, I mean I don't hear people talk about it as much as I think they should. First of all, I think Wan Shi Tong is really cool. He's not really a villain, he's just protecting his library. And I think he's one of the coolest spirits we meet in this whole show, and we don't meet a ton. And this episode does a great job of moving the plot along. For most of Season 2, it was trying to find an earthbending teacher, getting chased by Zula, secret love cave, hairy swamp guys, all that. And we've been posing the question, how are we going to end this war? And this episode finally gives us an answer. We learn about the eclipse and the invasion. And we finally have a goal this season to get to Ba Sing Se and get this information to the Earth King. And this episode has some pretty good world building. I mean, it introduces us to sandbenders and the fact that firebenders can't firebend on an eclipse, which is cool. And we get some connections that Zhao actually went to Wan Shi Tong's library when he was talking about when he figured out how to kill the moon spirit. I just think little connections like that really make this show good. The ending makes me sad every time. It's just a good ending to a good episode. I've just always liked this episode, and I think it should get more recognition. Let's move on. At number 17, we have the Southern Air Temple. Now, I didn't really write a lot in my notes, so this might go a little quickly. I'm not a big fan of Zhao, I mean, who is? But I will give him this. This episode does give him a pretty good introduction. It's not amazing like Toph's or Zula, but it's a pretty good introduction. The scene where Aang finds Gyatso is heartbreaking as always. I mean, I would act the same way if I found out my whole culture, race, and family were dead. This episode does have a more serious tone than a lot of episodes in Book 1, which is nice. And this episode has some pretty good world building with finding out that Aang has past lives and all that. This is definitely the best of the first 3 episodes. And when I first watched the show a couple years ago, This was the episode that really hooked me. At number 16, we have Lake Lao Guy. I'll get this out of the way first. Iroh's speech to Zuko about destiny is amazing, and it's actually one of my favorite scenes in the whole show. It might actually be my favorite scene in the show. It's a big part of Zuko's development and arc. Some of these words I can apply to my own life, like, who am I and what do I want? I just think it's one of the most powerful scenes in the whole show. The action in this episode is absolutely crazy, in a good way. The fight scene under the lake is awesome. All of Team Avatar is together fighting the Dai Li, and it's just one of the coolest fight scenes in the show. Even though Jet was more of a side character, he had a pretty good conclusion. He started off as a villain and became a hero. He wasn't really a villain, he just thought he was doing the right thing when he really wasn't, and he realized he was bad, and then he turned to good. So yeah, he went through a little mini arc. I forgot how good this episode was. I used to hate it, actually. But on this rewatch, I really enjoyed it. If I did this with my last rewatch, this episode would probably go in the bottom 30. Now, it's in the top 20, so that's a pretty big step up. Number 15, The Boiling Rock, Part 2. Now, just like the last part of this episode, I don't have much to say. Okay, seriously, I'm not going to talk like that for this whole placement. But yeah, this episode is a lot better than its Part 1 predecessor. It's a really fun prison escape episode, and I think the prison escape plan is a lot cooler than last episode's. Haha, get it? Cooler? Because they escaped in a cooler? Okay, I'll shut up. While it may not be one of the best fight scenes in the whole show, I really like the fight on the gondola. It's really cool, and it's a rematch we've been wanting for a while. Ty Lee versus Suki, while short, is pretty cool. And Zuko versus Azula is nice, I guess. It's just a really cool fight scene. It's nothing like we've seen before because it's a different environment. The scene where May and Ty Lee betray Azula is okay, I guess. I mean, it does start a pretty, I guess it's important, plot of Azula going into insanity. But I guess it's a pretty good scene. Okay, the way I'm talking, you may think that I don't really like this episode that much, but I do. But you'd understand if I showed you my notes. I didn't really give myself much leg room to work with. But yeah, I think this is a pretty fun episode. At number 14, we have the Southern Raiders. I mean, what is there to say about this episode that hasn't already been said? Like the last few spots, I'm not going to talk a lot about this episode. But it's a really good one. First of all, I think this is the most mature Avatar gets. This just goes to show that Avatar is for anyone, adults and children. I even got my dad to watch it one time, and he loved it. The action is great throughout the episode, but I especially like the ambush on the Western Air Temple. It's just a really cool fight between Zuko and Azula. This episode has a lot of great themes and moments, and that's what makes it great. And it has one of my favorite lines from the show.
You do have a choice. Forgiveness.
That's the same as doing nothing.
No, it's not. It's easy to do nothing, but it's hard to forgive. It's not.
That's such a powerful line, because it's true. And that's a great theme of this episode. It's really hard to forgive, but revenge isn't the right answer either. Everyone knows this is a great episode, so let's just get right into the next one. At number 13, we have The Tales of Ba Sing Se. This is multiple people's favorite episode, or it's at least in their top 10s, and I can absolutely see why. I'm going to do a little something special for this episode. I'm going to do a little mini ranking of all the segments in this episode. In last place, we got The Tale of Momo and Aang. I put these two together because they're both equally as okay. I guess Momo goes above Aang because the ending, and it shows how he and Appa are, really good friends. Next up, we got The Tale of Toph and Katara. This is still miles above Aang and Momo's tale. It's some nice development for Toph and Katara's relationship, and it's just some fun character bonding time. The Tale of Sokka is brilliant. It's funny, sad, everything I could ask for. And Sokka said, "Yeah, that's right, I'm Sokka. It's pronounced with an Aka. Young ladies, I rock ya." I felt that. The Tale of Zuko is awesome. just not much to say here. It just adds so much to Zuko's growth and development. It's just amazing. And, of course, the best one is the tale of Iroh. The writing here is absolutely amazing. Iroh goes around bossing Say, helping people out, sharing his wisdom, and being kind to everyone. Then we learn he was doing this because he couldn't help Lu Ten, his dead son. Whenever he starts singing Leaves from the Vine, I start tearing up a little. And all of this is in honor of Mako, Iroh's late voice actor. This episode is one of the reasons why Iroh is one of my favorite characters. The overall episode is amazing. Like I said, I can absolutely see why people put this in their top 10s, and why it's even their favorite episode. At number 12, we have the Waterbending Master. I've always loved this episode. I really don't care what other people say about it. It's awesome. First of all, it's the episode we've been waiting for ever since the start of Book 1. And it wastes no time getting to the Northern Water Tribe. And this may be a hot take, but I think it's one of the coolest locations in all of fiction. The way they use waterbending as doors, and that's really cool. The way the roads are made out of water, like Venice, Italy, is just really cool. This episode does a great job of setting up the two-part finale. It sets up Yue and Sokka, and it sets up the whole Siege of the North, which is what the two-part finale is called. And how can I go without mentioning the fight? The fight between Katara and Master Pakku is honestly one of my favorites in the show. It's some great development for Katara. We see how she never backs away from a fight and how she always stands up for what's right. And that's a good theme of this episode. Stand up for what's right. It's just awesome seeing Katara, who is a novice, putting up a decent fight against a master. I mean, she didn't even land a hit, but still, you get the point. Anyways, I've always loved this episode. And this episode actually leads us directly into number 11, Siege of the North Part 1. Now, like a lot of Part 1 episodes, this one is set up, but it's pretty good setup. It just sets up Part 2 in an amazing way. First of all, the action is pretty good, especially when Aang is stopping a couple of those Fire Nation ships. That was pretty good. And the animation in this episode is a lot better than a lot of Book 1 episodes. Probably because it's the finale. Sokka and Yue have so much chemistry, which makes Yue's sacrifice even more sad in the next episode. And this episode has one of the best scenes in Book 1, and possibly in the whole show. And of course, I'm talking about the scene where Iroh tells Zuko that he sees him as his own. And it's just such a powerful scene. So yes, while overall this episode is mostly set up, it's still really good setup. And I've always really liked the Book 1 finale. We're finally in the top 10 with number 10, Sozin's Comment Part 2, The Old Masters. I'll get my big problem out of the way first, and this is just my problem with the whole finale in general. I said it before and I'll say it again, I really don't like the lion turtle stuff in the finale. I mean, Aang doesn't find out his solution for himself, this giant lion turtle figures out for him. That's just my biggest problem with the finale in general. That's probably the last time I'll mention it. But yeah, this is a great way to set up the rest of your 4-part finale. It brings back old characters that we know and love, like Boomy, Piandao, Pakku, and it's a great way to bring the series full circle. Like I said, it's a great setup episode, but it's a lot more than just setup. We get to see what everyone's going to be doing while the comments here. Like, Sokka's going to be on the airship, Aang's going to be fighting Ozai, Iroh's going to be taking Ba Sing Se back, and Zuko's going to be fighting Azula. This is also known as their destinies, and that's another great theme of the show. Destiny is a funny thing. And it's cool that we get to meet past avatars this episode, like Karuk and Yang Chen. It's cool that we're still getting this stuff this late into the show. And yeah, everyone knows the title could refer to the past avatars and the White Lotus members. I don't even need to tell you why Iroh and Zuko's reunion is amazing. I know I said that one scene in Lake Laogai might be one of my favorite scenes in the whole show, maybe even my favorite, but I actually think this one's my favorite. It makes me cry every time, and it's just a beautiful reunion. I love it. This is a really good episode. does a great job of setting up the last 2 episodes of the whole show. Continuing in the top 10, we have number 9, The Avatar and the Fire Lord. Just like The Chase, this one used to be my favorite episode. But unlike The Chase, this one is still pretty high. A lot of people see this as one of the best episodes in the show, and I absolutely agree. This episode adds to Zuko's conflict within himself pretty good, because he learns that Avatar Roku is his great-grandfather. And that adds to his arc because he decides to follow in Roku's footsteps and being a good guy. I love the story this episode tells, and I love how they can fit this huge life story into this little 20-minute episode. The story's heartbreaking with Sozin's betrayal and a whole friendship being destroyed, and we even learn how the war started. Well, of course, we knew little details about how it started, but in this episode, we learned a lot more about it. This episode foreshadows Zuko's redemption with what Aang says at the end about friendships lasting lifetimes. I really love this episode. It's always been one of my favorites. At number 8, we have The Siege of the North Part 2. Now, this is a great season finale to a decent first season. The stakes are high because, the whole moon is at stake, and the whole Northern Water Tribe is at stake. It just makes for a really exciting finale. Pretty much everyone gets a chance to stand out in this episode, especially Iroh and Zuko. I mean, things got serious when Iroh yelled at Zhao. It's one of the best Iroh moments. This just shows that he's really smart and wants what's best for the world. Zuko gets his chance to stand out with his scene in the cave with Aang, which adds even more depth to his character because he's explaining how he had to struggle all his life, ever since he was banished, and I think that's a really strong scene. Yue's sacrifice is heartbreaking after we've seen the relationships he's built with Sokka, and it's just a really emotional moment. Overall, this is just a really great season finale, and this video is probably getting long, so I'm not going to waste any more of your time. At number 7, we have the Ember Island Players. I'm surprised this episode made it this high, but it deserves it. First of all, it's a really creative way to do a recap episode before the finale. I mean, you don't see characters watching a play about themselves in every TV show, right? I mean, Avatar isn't just any random TV show. And this is a really good recap episode. And yes, I do think this is the funniest episode in the whole show. It has so many funny moments with the characters on stage, and the fact that Toph is played by a big buff guy is hilarious. I heard someone say that the reason that Toph is played by a guy in the play is because the people that were explaining the stuff to the playwriters, they didn't want to admit that they were beat up by some little girl, and I just think that's the funniest thing ever. And this episode actually finds some time to put some serious character interactions in there. And it makes us wonder what's going to happen in the finale with the ending of the play. Overall, I do think this is the funniest episode in the whole show. It's cool that a show can poke fun at themselves sometimes, and it's just a really good episode. At number 6, we have The Day of Black Sun Part 1, The Invasion. This was the episode we were waiting for a whole season, and it was worth the wait. The action's great, the plan is great, pretty much everything is great. Pretty much everyone gets a time to shine, and I think it's really cool that they brought back older characters from Season 1 and Season 2. It's just a great way to bring everything full circle in your show. And Sokka is the best in this episode. We see how far he's come since we first met him. He's a strong leader, and he just has some amazing moments in this episode. This is an amazing episode. Yeah, I do like Part 2 more, but this is still really good. You don't need me to tell you why this episode is amazing. You've probably seen multiple people talking about why this is the best Avatar episode. I mean, I don't think it's the best episode, but it's still in the top 5. You've probably heard plenty about this episode, so I'm not going to waste your time at all. Let's just move on to the next one already. I'll probably go more in depth about this episode in another video, but that's not guaranteed. I just want y'all to know that this is a really good one. We're going into the top 5 with Sozin's Comet Part 3, Into the Inferno. Now, this is where the action in the finale really starts. After the 2 episodes of a lot of conversations and setting up the stakes, you finally get to the action, and it's worth the wait. Zuko versus Azula is freaking amazing. Just pretty much everything about it is perfect. The blue versus red fire, the score, the choreography, the emotional weight is just amazing. A lot of people put this fight over Aang versus Ozai. Me personally, I like both of them equally, but this one's still amazing. Speaking of Aang versus Ozai, we get the start of that fight in this episode, and it's pretty good. My only real problem with it is that it feels like a big chase, but the animation's great, the choreography's great, just everything about it's great, just like Zuko versus Azula. The scene where Aang redirects Ozai's lightning has always been one of my favorites because, well, he could just end it right then and there, but he decides not to because it's against his whole cultural traditions. It's just a really good Aang moment. And the airship fleet fight is always pretty cool. And it does a great job of showing how far Sokka has come as a character. I really don't care for Azula's mental downfall. It definitely could have been handled better. If it happened earlier, that would have worked a lot better in my opinion, because they kind of just throw it into this episode and it doesn't really work for me. Overanalyzing Avatar goes really in depth to this, so go watch his channel if you want to, hear what he thinks. Number 3, we have The Day of Black Sun Part 2, The Eclipse. Now this is a pretty good continuation from the last episode. All the action is great, again. Every character gets a time to shine, again. It's just a great continuation from the last episode. Aang, Sokka, and Toph versus Azula and the Dai Li is a pretty awesome fight, and it's great for the climax of the episode. Well, one of the climaxes of the episode. Yeah, you know how I said Zuko and Iroh's hug and that scene in Lake Laogai were my favorite scenes in the whole show? I was lying. Zuko's redemption is my favorite scene in the whole show. It's been built up for 2 seasons. It's the turning point for Zuko and when he really sees the light. And the way Zuko redirects Ozai's lightning is just so cool, and it's just one of the best scenes in the whole entire show. I forgot to mention that we're finally getting into the 10 out of 10s, and yeah, this episode definitely deserves that rating. I love this episode so much. At number 2, we have The Crossroads of Destiny. This is my new favorite episode. It's the perfect finale for Season 2 and the Ba Sing Se arc in general. This episode sets up Zuko's redemption arc in Book 3 pretty well, because at the end of the episode, we see that he has this little inner conflict with himself, which is a big part of Book 3. If you don't feel stabbed in the back when Zuko chooses Azula's side over Iroh's, I don't know what's wrong with you, because we're so attached to these characters, and I really felt stabbed in the back the first time I watched it. Azula's great in this episode, because we really see how much of a menace and how manipulative she can be. She's just a really cool villain. And you know she's crazy when she's the one who killed Aang. Speaking of Aang dying, that's something we didn't expect coming. I mean, it was foreshadowed in episode 1 of the season, but we never really expected it to happen, and it did. It's a really big twist, and it's just really cool that it happened because it's something you would never expect to happen in what's supposed to be a kid's show. And I love how the season leaves you off with that Empire Strikes Back feeling, because the hero's lost, and it really makes you wonder how these characters are really going to win. So yeah, this is my favorite episode. But you may be wondering, if this is number 2, then what could number 1 possibly be? Well, I'm saving that one for something special. Yeah, that's right. At number 1, we got Sozin's Comment Part 4, Avatar Aang. Finales are hard, and you're not going to please everyone with your finale. But I think Avatar does. It does the impossible by having a almost perfect finale. Now, I don't think there's any such thing as a perfect finale, but Avatar does get pretty close. It's just a really satisfying conclusion to this whole story. The world is at peace, and Zuko becomes Fire Lord. The gang finally gets to chill for once. Aang and Katara. Aang not killing Ozai. It's just an amazing finale. Pretty much everything has a satisfying conclusion except one thing, and I'll get to that in a minute. But let's talk about characters. The finale does a great job of showing how far these characters have come since the beginning. Aang was this goofy kid who didn't want to be the Avatar. He only knew airbending, and although he was a strong fighter, he wasn't as strong as he was at the end. But at the end, Aang is a fully realized Avatar. He masters the Avatar state and puts up a pretty good fight against Ozai. And he's not just the random kid they found in the iceberg. He's Avatar Aang. That's basically the gimmick of this episode's title, because the first one was The Boy in the Iceberg, and this one's Avatar Aang. Just a great way to bring things full circle. Katara goes from being this girl who really wants to be a waterbending master to becoming a waterbending master and helping Aang end the war. Sokka was this goofy guy from the Water Tribe who ended up becoming a leader and a strong fighter. Now, a lot of people say that Toph doesn't have an arc, but she does. At the beginning, she was carrying her own weight, and she never relied on anyone else or helped anyone else. But by the end, she learned how to be a team player and learned how to get help from her friends. And of course, everyone knows about Zuko's redemption. He goes from being this one-dimensional, I have to catch the Avatar, villain, who was following a destiny that his father put on him, to choosing his own path and his own destiny, and to finally knowing the difference between right and wrong. I also think all the fights from the previous episode get a pretty good conclusion too. The airship fight is always pretty cool. There's some great Sokka stuff in there. While Iroh reconquering Ba Sing Se doesn't get too much screen time, it's still a really cool fight because we got to see these old people beat up a bunch of soldiers. Aang versus Ozai is freaking epic. I don't care what you guys say. Yeah, a lot of people don't like how Aang takes Ozai's bending, but I think it's serviceable. How else will he beat him without, killing him? A lot of people don't like how Aang got energy bending, me included, but they gotta do what they gotta do. The only fight conclusion I'm not the biggest fan of is the final Agni Kai. Everyone says Zuko should have beaten Azula, and I agree. I mean, Katara was kind of just standing there given nothing to do, so I guess it's cool that she beat her, but I do really think that Zuko should have been the one to beat Azula. And that's all I have to say. I love this finale. It's not my favorite episode, but it's still really close. I do think it's the best episode. The action's great, it's a really satisfying finale, and it's a great way to show us how far these characters have come since the beginning. I've always loved this finale. So, that's it. I've officially ranked every episode of Avatar The Last Airbender. And it only took me a whole month. Yeah, I'm sorry this video took so long. I know I promised it a month and a half ago, and it took this long to come out, but keep in mind, I had to rewatch the whole show, take notes, edit, and the fact that I wasn't doing it every day had a big impact on it. I'm just really sorry it took this long. I love the finished product, though. I had a lot of fun making this video, and I'd hate to see it fail. So, share this to your friends that like Avatar. I don't know, maybe put it on in the background a couple times. Who cares? I just wanted to get my thoughts out on this amazing show, because it's my favorite show of all time. If you stayed this far, thank you so much. If you're new here, make sure you like and subscribe, because you must like me if you stayed this whole hour-long video. There's just not much to do here except start another rewatch of Avatar. Oh yeah, that's a cut.